how big of a role did the Chumash play in like the overall history of the Channel Islands?
A huge role. They were here for at least 13,000 years. One of the oldest human bones in North America was found on Santa Rosa Island. So they were here for a very, very long time. So these islands, belong to them for a long time. And they are still a very important part of their culture and history today.
And they were hunter-gatherers, so the role they played was actually for modern man to give us an example of how you can live sustainably. Although they didn't know they were doing that at the time. They came here, they think now possibly by sea, because there's a lot of evidence, a mounting group of evidence for that theory. But they were able to take everything at hand and turn it into something that was useful in their daily life, So, for instance, the baskets that they wove were made out of tule, which grew everywhere. They were so well knit that they could hold water after they dripped a little bit. They could take a volcanic rock and put it in the water, and now they had boiling water. They had chert, which is a crystallized version of diatomaceous earth. They made wonderful tools. They traded with the mainland Chumash and other tribes like the Navajos. They traveled all over the place. So the role, the island actually had a larger role in their life than they had in the island's life, because it's their origin story that begins there. It's their Garden of Eden. When they got there, they were astonished at the abundance of everything. There was fish all over the place, lots of things to eat, temperate climate. On the mainland, they had to contend with saber-toothed tigers and 16-foot tall grizzly bears and rattlesnakes, to name a few. On the island, none of that, no predators. The biggest thing was the Pygmy Mammoth, and they were pretty benign. So.
They are isolated out here. So they had to survive on what they had out here, as well as trading. So what did they have out here? Well, they had a lot of seeds, they had bulbs from plants, and of course they had a lot of seafood. So abalone and any of the fish that they could catch when they go out fishing. And of course, when they did create those tomals, those canoes, they could go across the channel and go into deeper waters to get bigger fish, and they could go across the channel to trade. So their main source of food on the mainland was acorns. So they would trade for acorns and, of course, other wild game meat, such as deer. Yeah.
They had their own system of money. They would, chert is this crystallized version of diatomaceous earth I told you about. They would make micro drills out of this chert and then take olivella snail shells, cut them into, an olivella snail shell is about this big. They cut it into slices, drill holes in it, string it on a string made out of milkweed, which they had to make everything. And one wrap around your hand was a measure of wealth. So when the Spaniards came, they gave them one Spanish real for 8 of those Chumash. And the chiefs and the boat makers, which were a higher class of people, would wrap their olivella snail shell money around their wrists, and so it's like they were wearing their savings account on their body.
What's interesting about that is they found those in Chumash graves in our neighborhood, like literally where Vaughn's is now was a Chumash burial ground. And when they were excavating it, they found these same beads that were made by the island Chumash. And from those, they were able to ascertain like the status of different people. You had this many beads with you, you had this many beads with you. One of the things that's fascinating to me about that is the beads aren't actually worth anything. It's just perceived currency or perceived value, like a lot of currency is they made them, people coveted them, and so therefore they were able to take these shells that were essentially worthless and turn them into something that they could get things in return for.
I gave a presentation one time called "What the Chumash." We're not that different than the Chumash. We both love bling. They had wonderful jewelry. We both love working communally with our hands, and we both love our Mother Earth. And that may be the signature characteristic of them. They were very much in tune with the earth. That's something present day mankind needs to get back to, in my opinion.
Over the course of time, the Chumash living on the Channel Islands were under some ecological pressures in terms of there were periods of drought, there was an earthquake, and these situations that were already putting them in stress. When the Spanish arrived and introduced new diseases, the population fell off drastically. The opportunity to go to the missions was presented to them, and though it wasn't that attractive of an option, things were so bad for them at that point that they thought that it was their best option. So they began moving to the missions in, I believe, 1816, and by 1820, the last of the Chumash were off the islands. Mexican independence was gained from Spain in about 1810, and then the United States won California from Mexico in 1858, I think, which is when it became a state. So there's sort of a narrow range in there, but in that narrow range was when the Chumash essentially left the island. And then in the intervening time, when the Chumash were gone and before the land was fully privatized, there was a lot of ecological rebounding, I guess, that occurred where if shellfish populations weren't being exploited like the abalone, the kelp could come back, a lot of the plants that were being used for food were able to regenerate. And so then so there was kind of a narrow period in there where there was this ecological window where the island wasn't being exploited as much, and then when it came into private land or private control, and then everything went to hell.
Well, the Channel Islands were given under a land grant to the Cabrillo family. That's as far back in the history as I know. So Juan Cabrillo was an explorer. He came up here and was friends with the sitting president of Mexico, and was awarded the islands, and didn't do much with them. And so they were just kind of a I don't know what you call it, a talisman of being a loyal member of the ruling class in Mexico at the time.
After Mexico became independent from Spain, land that was formerly under control of the Spanish missions was given into private hands. So families that had been particularly loyal to the Mexican government were able to get large swaths of land. Like we have some of those ranchos in this area too, like the Reyes family had a ranch, we had the Las Virgenes Ranch, etc.
In the 1800s, 1850 or so, the French family, Justinian Care and his family, bought the islands and turned it into a farming enterprise. They were very successful at it, but they did it. First thing they did was bring sheep and pigs to the island, which the sheep ate everything on top of the soil. The pigs dug up the roots, and in 130 or 40 years, they had almost rendered the island barren. Okay, yeah. So the impact was enormous and very quick, and we're still today fighting to undo all that. And it's a long, tedious process, but it is happening. So, Prisoners Harbour was named. When you're the first person there, you get to name things. There was a boatload of Mexican prisoners. The prisons were full in Mexico. They couldn't find a place to keep these boatload of prisoners, so they brought them all the way up here. They took them to Santa Barbara and further north, trying to find a jail big enough to house them and to get rid of them. Basically, the guy the skipper on the boat, that was his job, find a place. So after many frustrating landings, going ashore, talking to the local authorities, and getting rejected, he took them over to that end of Santa Cruz Island there, right next to Pelican Bay, and put them ashore with supplies. Said, "Look, I'll be back in a couple of weeks as soon as I can find something that'll work for you guys. So wait right here." And well, he came back a couple weeks later, and of course they forgot the "wait right here" part. They'd all disappeared. But that's where the name comes. Prisoners Cove. Right now, it's undoing the damage that the farming had done to the island. The invasive species, principal of whom is the eucalyptus tree, uses thousands of gallons of water every day. On the Nature Conservancy side of the island, they've already started removing those. The Nature Conservancy has a lot more money than the Park Service, and they got a 20-year head start on them. So they are now removing the principal invader, which is the eucalyptus tree. On the National Park side of the island, not yet. They want to do that, but it's an enormously expensive project. They just don't have the budget. There's other invasive grasses, mustard, fennel, ryegrass that were planted for the sheep, some of it, and there's a constant battle. But some of the endemic plants, like the island buckwheat, are mounting a pretty good counteroffensive and trying to. And you'll see these populations of endemic plants surrounding the invasive plants, and one can only hope that they're going to win the battle. But it's an ongoing process. The Spaniards, when they first came to the island in the 1500s, they described them as so lush and overgrown with trees and chaparral and all this wonderful greenery that they had to crawl underneath them to get anywhere. And that in days when the rivers were all full of water, there was springs everywhere. It's a different island today, but we've had a 7-year drought. So I started volunteering 3 years ago for the National Park Service in the Channel Islands Naturalist Corps, and We originally signed a commitment to do 80 hours of work a year. I'm shooting for 1,000 hours this year. That'll tell you how it was impacted. I love being out here. I love showing people the island and telling the story of the island. It's a wonderful metaphor for planet Earth.
Well, I don't really know what I expected, but what I hope is that these islands continue to be preserved because we have so many special, unique plants and animals that only exist here and nowhere else in the world. So it is a very special place because of that. Also to protect those special places that belong to the Chumash people. And of course the ranching history that also happened on these islands. So all I can hope is that this continues, that these places continue to be protected and our plants and animals culture and history also continue to be preserved.
I think that the islands as they are right now is a really amazing thing with the extent of protection that the islands have. Some of it's national park land, some of it's other types of land management, but a lot of it is open to research. And so there's a lot of local universities like Cal State Channel Islands and UC Santa Barbara and UCLA are able to do field research out there, and they're learning so much about not just those people, but the fact that they found human remains from 13,000 years ago there lends support to the theories that man diffused down the Pacific coast rather than down the central part of North America. So we're learning about settlement of the Americas entirely from the case studies that we have there on this island. And I would hope that in the future they continue to be protected the way they are now, but also that we can continue to learn from them.
The islands are going to be held up as a model for, or a paradigm for what we have to do here on planet Earth. We are in a global environmental disaster, ongoing, right? This island almost went barren. Thanks to the efforts of great science, a wonderful army of volunteers and some good funding, they're slowly bringing the islands back. This is the task at hand for the rest of the planet. We have to change the way we live and the way we interact with the planet, or we will all go the way of the island Chumash.